Hello, I'm Mercedes Stephenson, and this is the West Block: politics, perspectives, and players.
I think it's important to support the citizens of Hong Kong, including 300,000 Canadians, who really want to see the one country, two systems approach to Hong Kong and China continue.
That was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Canada, along with the UK, Australia, and the US, are condemning China for violating an agreement that gives autonomy to Hong Kong under something called the One Government, Two Systems Agreement with China. So, what does the new Chinese security legislation mean for Hong Kong? Late last week, I spoke to Emily Lau. She's the former chair of the Hong Kong Democratic Party. Here's that conversation. Joining me now is Emily Lau, former chair of the Hong Kong Democratic Party. Thank you so much for making time for us, Ms. Lau.
Thank you.
Can you tell me what the situation is right now in Hong Kong with China bringing this law in, and what it will mean for your beloved Hong Kong?
Well, of course, you probably have heard that the China's rubber stamp parliament passed the proposal to make this law on Thursday. And now the details will be worked out in the coming weeks. And this is a Chinese national law on security, national security, which will be foisted on Hong Kong. They are creating offenses of subversion and of liaison with foreign forces, with terrorism, and with secession. Which I think people in Canada should know, the people from Quebec. So, and these offenses, the details have not yet been worked out, but they could be very, very broad. So people in Hong Kong, many of us are very frightened that it could restrict our freedom of expression, including my ability to talk to you right now, and also freedom of assembly, freedom of conscience, academic freedom, all these things to do with the mind, because they, in the mainland, they penalize people for exercising free speech. So, and the thing is, this law is going to be foisted on us without consulting us. How offensive, how terrible. And our mini constitution, the basic law, says, well, yes, we have to legislate on our own, on a law on national security, which of course we failed to do since Hong Kong became part of China in 1997, because the people were very worried. And now suddenly Beijing, the Communist Party, they have lost their patience. They say, oh, you don't want to do it? We do it for you. And they just sprung it on us out of the blue, and bang, it's done. They're going to work out the details. So people are very, very concerned. And most important of all, because it's a Chinese mainland law, which is going to be foisted on us. So this is going to be like driving a truck through China's policy of one country, two systems, which should last from 97 for 50 years until 2047. Under that, we will be separate from mainland China. But now if Chinese law is going to foist it on us, and national security people will probably be deployed to Hong Kong to implement the law. And they could arrest Hong Kong people, and they could even take Hong Kong people back to mainland China for trial. And in mainland China, crimes of national security, they are tried in camera. The defendant will not be able to meet with the family members or with the lawyers, and they can be locked up for many years, even without trial. So this is the state of affair in Hong Kong, and that's why we are so anxious and terrified.
Emily, how do you feel personally? Because you have been an advocate for democracy. We have spoken before in November. Here we are just a few months later, but I wonder if a few months from now, you will be able to have this kind of a conversation with a journalist.
Well, I don't know, my dear, but we live under communist rule. So this is the harsh reality. And the trouble is, the British government delivered the Hong Kong people to communist rule in 1997 without giving us any protection. At that time, I was like a journalist. I was a journalist like you. And I put the question to then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. I said, Prime Minister, you signed an agreement with China promising to deliver over 5 million people into the hands of a communist dictatorship. Is that morally defensible? Or is it really true that in international politics, the highest form of morality is one's own national interest? And Maggie said, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. Everyone is happy with the agreement. And you, Emily Lau, you may be a solitary exception. I can assure you now, I'm not a solitary exception. And I think the way Britain abandoned her own citizens is disgraceful.
What will happen next in Hong Kong? When we last talked, you'd said hopefully that the international community speaking out would be enough to stop China from advancing further. That has not been the case. Do you think that now there will be violence or there will be an uprising by the people of Hong Kong?
Well, I think the Hong Kong people will continue to protest, and you've seen them protesting just yesterday and the day before. And some of them are not afraid. Many have been beaten up very badly by the police, and over 8,000 have been arrested. And so it is a very, very terrible scene. But many of them, particularly the young people, they will not allow themselves to be intimidated. So the Hong Kong people will continue to protest, and I hope they will do it in a non-violent way. But we still call on the international community to help us. Canada, you know, there are 300,000 Canadian citizens living and working in Hong Kong, and hundreds of Canadian companies operating here. So I certainly hope the Canadian government, the US, the British, the Australian, I hope they will all speak out, and they all have their citizens here. It's not as if they're just doing it for us. They should be doing it for their own citizens. Just imagine how many aircraft carriers or Boeing does Canada have to send to Hong Kong if it needs to mount an evacuation? And of course, we don't want to see the Hong Kong people like the Vietnamese boat people that we saw in the last century floating out to sea. And Hong Kong was the first port of call. We accepted them and helped them to get a resettlement. We don't want to see that happening again. But I hope Canada will open its doors to Hong Kong immigrants. And you know, Hong Kong people are very good immigrants, but while we are here, we will fight. But we want the international community to stand with us.
Emily, would you like to see Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Canada give people from Hong Kong refugee status?
Well, I don't hope that the situation would deteriorate to becoming refugees. But of course, nobody knows. But I hope that if you can liberalize your immigration policy even a bit more for Hong Kong people, because they would love to apply to come to Canada or to go somewhere where it's free, where it's safe. And if the Canadian government, if your parliament would do that, I think we would be very happy. But refugees, wow, if we come to a day when there are Hong Kong boat people and refugees, maybe like in the last century, the United Nations may have to hold a big meeting to see how to resettle the refugees from Hong Kong. But we don't want that to happen, my dear friend. We just want to be free and to be safe and to live in Hong Kong. So we hope the international community will tell the barbaric Communist Party in Beijing to cool it. And also, we're not trying to fight for independence or secession. No, we just want China to keep the promise in the 1984 Sino-British Joint Declaration Leave us alone. Let us have a high degree of autonomy, have personal safety, rule of law and freedom, and develop democracy.
As you know, there's been a lot of tension between the Canadian government and the Chinese government over the arrest of Meng Wanzhou here in Canada, and of course, China's detention of Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig. The Canadian court in BC made a decision that Meng Wanzhou's extradition trial could continue, that there was a basis for double criminality there. The Chinese government has been warning there will be consequences for Canada. What do you think the future looks like for Canada there, Ms. Lau?
Well, I think the Canadians have great respect for the rule of law and independence of the judiciary. And I think that's exactly what your Prime Minister has said. So I think you should carry on as decent, upstanding Canadians, upholding your own core values. If other bigger powers act like a bully, I don't think the Canadians would allow themselves to be bullied, especially when you know your courts are doing the right thing. These are the things you have upheld all your life. So maybe you'll go through a difficult patch. I understand the two Michaels. It's very sad. And because over there in mainland China, it's complete lawlessness. Well, they could arrest other people too and hold them hostage. And that's how nasty they are. And that's what the international community is coming to realize, that you try to engage China and think that they will enter the international community as a law-abiding, as a responsible member. But that was all a mistake. And now the French foreign minister recently said, we should not care about Hong Kong. We should just do our French thing. I think that's ridiculous. We live in a global village. If there are values that we share, I think we should stand with each other. Now, we want you to stand with Hong Kong. But of course, tiny Hong Kong will stand with Canada.
Emily, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us. For the West Block, I'm Mercedes Stephenson.